At 11 minutes past 1 o'clock on the morning of 16th October 1946, Joachim von Ribbentrop walked through a door into a small, brightly lit gymnasium inside Nuremberg prison. Two white-helmeted guards flanked him. His hands were bound behind his back with a leather thong. His sparse grey hair ruffled in the wind as he crossed the courtyard moments before, his eyes half closed as if walking through a trance. When asked to state his name at the foot of the 13 wooden stairs, he almost shouted it, "Joachim von Ribbentrop!" He mounted the scaffold without hesitation. Standing on the trap, his feet bound with a webbed army belt, he raised his head with a final flash of the arrogance that had defined his diplomatic career. When asked for any last words, Hitler's former foreign minister spoke clearly. "God protect Germany. God have mercy on my soul. My last wish is that Germany realize its unity and that an understanding be reached between the East and the West. I wish peace to the world." 18 minutes later, he was pronounced dead. His chapter in history had closed, but for his wife Annelies and their 5 children, another chapter was only beginning. From the privileges of champagne wealth and diplomatic glamour to the uncertainty of post-war Germany, the Ribbentrop name would carry a weight that none of them had chosen. Their story reveals how the families of Nazi leaders navigated a world that would never forget. The Ribbentrop family had risen to the heights of Nazi society through a combination of wealth, ambition, and ideological commitment. Joachim had met Annelies at a social event in 1919, when he was a well-travelled young man seeking to rebuild his life after the First World War. She was the daughter of one of Germany's wealthiest champagne producers. Their marriage in July 1920 had been opposed by her family, who considered Joachim a social climber with more charm than substance. But Annelies saw potential where others saw vanity. Together, they built a wine import business that made them wealthy and gave Joachim the international connections that would later attract Hitler's attention. By the early 1930s, as Germany descended into economic chaos and political extremism, the Ribbentrops had positioned themselves at the intersection of business and politics. Their elegant villa in Dahlem became a meeting place for those who sought to shape Germany's future. It was here, in January 1933, that the secret negotiations took place between Hitler, Franz von Papen, and representatives of President Hindenburg that resulted in Hitler's appointment as Chancellor. Annelies served champagne to the men who were about to destroy German democracy. Within months, Joachim had become Hitler's foreign policy advisor, beginning a meteoric rise that would take him from champagne salesman to ambassador to Britain to foreign minister of the Third Reich. Their children grew up surrounded by privilege and ideology. Rudolph, born in May 1921, was raised in an atmosphere of nationalism and ambition. When his father was appointed ambassador to the court of St. James in 1936, Rudolph accompanied the family to London and was enrolled at Westminster School, one of Britain's most prestigious institutions. His time there was brief and troubled. Classmates later remembered him as arrogant and provocative, arriving each morning in plum-coloured Mercedes limousines while chauffeurs shouted, "Heil Hitler," and gave Nazi salutes. He wore his Hitler Youth badge on his school uniform and praised the glories of the new Germany to students whose families would soon be fighting against it. When the Times newspaper learned that the German ambassador's son was attending a British public school, the resulting publicity forced his removal. He returned to Germany and continued his education in preparation for the military career that awaited. In the final chaotic weeks of April 1945, the Ribbentrop family found itself scattered across a collapsing Reich. Joachim von Ribbentrop, once among the most powerful men in Nazi Germany, was still clinging to his position as foreign minister, even as Soviet artillery pounded Berlin. His wife Annelies and their younger children had fled the capital weeks earlier, heading west toward the Rhineland in hopes of reaching territory that would fall to the Western Allies rather than the Red Army. Their eldest son, Rudolph, was still fighting. At 23 years old, he commanded a tank battalion of the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, one of the most fanatical units in the German military. In the final desperate weeks of the war, he led Kampfgruppe Ribbentrop through Hungary and Austria, retreating toward the River Enns as American forces closed in from the west. When Germany surrendered on 8th May 1945, Rudolph von Ribbentrop surrendered with his division to American troops. He had been wounded 5 times during the war, including once through the lung and once in the mouth by a shell fragment. His bravery was unquestionable, whatever his politics. He had been decorated with the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, the German Cross in gold, and the Wound Badge in gold. Now, at war's end, he became a prisoner. For the next 3 years, he would move between American, British, and French custody, facing interrogation and accusations. At one point, British investigators charged him with shooting 2 Canadian prisoners of war during an interrogation in France, one of them fatally. The charges could not be proven, and he was eventually released. But the accusations would follow him, another shadow added to the weight of his father's name. Rudolph's wartime record was extraordinary by any military standard. He had enlisted in the SS Infantry Regiment Deutschland on 1st September 1939, the very day Germany invaded Poland. He had fought in France in 1940, earning his first wound and his first Iron Cross. After officer training at the SS Junkerschule in Braunschweig, he had been commissioned in April 1941 and assigned to the reconnaissance battalion of SS Kampfgruppe Nord in Finland. There he fought against the Soviets in brutal Arctic conditions, winning the Finnish Freedom Cross before being wounded again in his left forearm. After months of recovery, he was assigned to the newly formed tank regiment of the 1st SS Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, one of the most elite units in the German military. It was in the east that Rudolph proved himself as a tank commander. During the Third Battle of Kharkov in February and March 1943, he led his platoon in the desperate counter-offensive that recaptured the Ukrainian city from Soviet forces. At one point, shot through the lung by a sniper, he continued to rescue wounded soldiers and refused evacuation until the battle was won. He was awarded the Iron Cross First Class. But his greatest moment came on 12th July 1943 at the Battle of Prokhorovka, one of the largest tank engagements in history. Rudolph, now commanding a company of Panzer IV tanks, found himself facing approximately 150 Soviet T-34 tanks in the early morning. In the chaos of the 3-hour battle that followed, he personally destroyed 14 enemy tanks, penetrating the Soviet formation and wreaking havoc from within. For this action, he was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, Nazi Germany's highest military decoration. He had become one of the most decorated young officers in the Waffen-SS. Meanwhile, his father had gone into hiding. While Annelies and the children reached relative safety in the Rhineland, Joachim von Ribbentrop fled Berlin in the final days and made his way north to Hamburg. Using the codename Reich, he concealed himself in a boarding house, nurturing a desperate plan to finance an escape to South America by selling valuable shipments of cognac through wine merchant contacts. It was a plan befitting a man who had built his fortune in the champagne trade before politics consumed him. But fate had other plans. The son of an acquaintance betrayed him to British intelligence. On 14th June 1945, British military police and intelligence officers tracked him to the Hamburg boarding house. They found him sleeping in pink and white pajamas. When they burst in, he reportedly said in perfectly rehearsed English, "The game is up. I congratulate you. You know who I am. If you had come 2 days later, I would already have given myself up voluntarily." They confiscated a capsule of potassium cyanide strapped to his body, several 100,000 Reichsmarks, and letters addressed to General Montgomery and Vincent Churchill, criticizing British foreign policy and blaming the British for the Soviet occupation of Eastern Germany. He was immediately taken into Allied custody. For Annelies von Ribbentrop, the news of her husband's capture transformed her legal position overnight. Born Anna Elisabeth Henkel in 1896, she was the daughter of Otto Henkel, founder of one of Germany's most prestigious champagne houses. She had married Joachim in 1920 when he was a charming, well-travelled wine merchant who wore English suits and carried an umbrella with continental flair. Her mother had despised him, calling him arrogant and predicting disaster. But Annelies was headstrong. She saw in Joachim ambition that matched her own, and she pushed him relentlessly upward. It was Annelies who urged him to join the Nazi Party in 1932. It was Annelies who hosted the secret meetings at their Dahlem villa, where Hitler, Papen, and Hindenburg's son negotiated the deal that made Hitler Chancellor. Hitler himself once remarked that Annelies wore the trousers in the Ribbentrop household. Joseph Goebbels was more cutting. He said Ribbentrop bought his name, married his money, got his position by swindle, and received his political ideas from his wife. Now, in the summer of 1945, that formidable woman found herself under Allied scrutiny. Annelies was arrested and interned in a camp established on the grounds of the former Dachau concentration camp near Munich. The irony was not lost on anyone. Here, in a place that had witnessed Nazi atrocities, the wife of Hitler's foreign minister would write her memoirs and begin constructing the defense of her husband's legacy. She was held for questioning about the Ribbentrop fortune, much of it derived from her family's champagne business, but augmented substantially during the Third Reich. Allied investigators wanted to know what she knew about her husband's diplomatic activities, about hidden assets, about the networks that had enabled Nazi foreign policy. Annelies remained defiant. She insisted she had known nothing of crimes, that her husband had merely been a diplomat doing his duty. She would maintain this position for the rest of her life. The Nuremberg trials began in November 1945, and Joachim von Ribbentrop sat in the dock as one of the most prominent defendants. The prosecution presented evidence of his role in planning aggressive wars against Poland, the Soviet Union, and the Western Allies. They documented his pressure on satellite states to deport their Jewish populations. They showed how he had worked to isolate potential victims and prevent neutral countries from offering refuge. Ribbentrop's defense was inconsistent and often contradictory. He claimed ignorance of the Holocaust while simultaneously defending Nazi racial policies. Prison psychologist Gustav Gilbert described him as a confused and demoralized opportunist. His own lawyer complained that this man is impossible to defend. Throughout the proceedings, Annelies visited Nuremberg and supplied her husband with documents and testimony for his defense. She never wavered in her support. The verdict came on Thursday, October 1946. Joachim von Ribbentrop was found guilty on all 4 counts: conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, planning and waging wars of aggression, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The tribunal specifically cited his role in pressuring Hungary and other countries to hand over their Jews for deportation. He was sentenced to death by hanging. 15 days later, he became the first of the Nuremberg defendants to mount the scaffold, taking Hermann Göring's place after Göring cheated the gallows by swallowing a cyanide capsule the night before. When the trap opened beneath Ribbentrop's feet at 1:16 in the morning, Annelies became a widow. She was 50 years old. Her 5 children ranged in age from 6-year-old Barthold, born in December 1940, to 25-year-old Rudolph. None of them would ever escape their father's shadow. In the immediate aftermath of Joachim's execution, Annelies faced the complex machinery of Allied occupation justice. Her vast fortune was impounded. The Henkel Champagne Empire had thrived during the Third Reich, and investigators were determined to trace the family's wartime enrichment. Yet Annelies possessed something her husband had lacked: cunning combined with resources. Unlike many Nazi widows who faced denazification tribunals and emerged stripped of property and rights, Annelies managed to navigate the system with remarkable success. She was not formally "unnazifisiert," not subjected to the full screening process that classified Germans according to their Nazi involvement. Whether through legal maneuvering, well-placed connections, or simple bureaucratic oversight, she managed to retain a substantial portion of her family money. By the early 1950s, she had returned to the Rhineland and begun the work that would consume her remaining decades, rehabilitating her husband's reputation. In 1953, she published her first major work in her husband's defense, a book titled Zwischen London und Moskau, Between London and Moscow, which presented Joachim's memoirs and final notes from his Nuremberg cell. The book portrayed him as a diplomat who had genuinely sought peace, who had tried to maintain good relations with both Britain and the Soviet Union, and who had been misunderstood and ultimately martyred by Victor's justice. She supplemented his writings with her own commentary and with documents she claimed proved his innocence. The following year, she released his full memoirs, the Ribbentrop Memoirs, which he had written in his cell between his sentencing and execution. She continued writing and collecting testimonies throughout the 1950s and 1960s, building an archive of defenses that would never convince historians, but would provide comfort to those who shared her worldview. Annelies remained, as one historian noted, a real national socialist until her death. She never expressed remorse. She never acknowledged the crimes committed by the regime her husband had served. She died on 5 October 1973 in Wuppertal at the age of 77, still defending her husband's memory. Of the 5 Ribbentrop children, it was Rudolph who carried the most visible burden of his father's legacy. After his release from Allied custody in 1948, he faced the challenge of rebuilding a life in a Germany that despised his name. His wartime record was undeniable. He had been one of the most decorated tank commanders in the Waffen-SS, a unit considered elite by the Nazis, but criminal by the Allies. He had fought at Kharkov, at Kursk, in Normandy, in the Ardennes, in Hungary, and finally in Austria. He had destroyed Soviet tanks at Prokhorovka in one of the largest tank battles in history. None of this made him popular in post-war Germany. Yet Rudolph possessed advantages that many former soldiers lacked. His mother's champagne fortune, though reduced, still provided resources, and he had skills that translated to peacetime organization, languages, business acumen inherited from both sides of his family. In the early 1950s, a West German court handed Annelies an unexpected victory. She had produced a legal compact that Henkel and Company had been pressured into signing in 1942, when her husband was at the height of his power as foreign minister. The contract stipulated that if she requested it, her son Rudolph would be appointed manager of the champagne company after working there for 2 years. Otto Henkel Jr., now running the family firm, fought bitterly against this. He offered Annelies nearly $100,000 to buy out the contract. She refused. The dispute dragged through the courts until a judge ruled that Otto must hire Rudolph. Otto pleaded with the court. People would feel offended receiving a letter signed by a Ribbentrop. The judges disagreed. To throw out the contract on such reasoning, they ruled, would be tantamount to Sippenhaft, the Nazi and Stalinist practice of punishing relatives for the crimes of family members. The court predicted that by January 1956, Western civilization would no longer be horrified by the name Ribbentrop. Otto grimly announced that his cousin will be put in a job where he can do the least possible harm. Rudolph worked for the Henkel firm for a time, though he eventually built his own career as a wine merchant, perhaps inevitably drawn to the trade that had first launched his father's ambitions. What set Rudolph apart from many descendants of Nazi leaders was his willingness to defend his father publicly and extensively. Unlike some children who distanced themselves from their parents' legacies or maintained careful silence, Rudolph embraced the role of his father's advocate. In 2008, when he was 87 years old, he published a memoir in German titled Mein Vater Joachim von Ribbentrop, Erlebnisse und Erinnerungen. My father, Joachim von Ribbentrop, Experiences and Memories. The book drew on his personal recollections, family correspondence, and his own wartime experiences to portray his father's private life, diplomatic career, and relationship with Hitler. Rudolph depicted Joachim as a principled figure who sought to avert broader conflict despite serving as foreign minister, claiming his father had attempted to restrain Hitler's aggressive policies and had not endorsed genocidal actions. He expressed pride in what he described as his father's occasional defiance of Hitler. The memoir included previously unpublished photographs of the family with Hitler and other Nazi leaders, images that stirred controversy, when British newspapers published them in 2019, after an English translation appeared. Rudolph lived to see that English edition published. He died on 20th May 2019 at the age of 98. With his death, the last Knight's Cross holder of the Waffen-SS passed from history. His obituaries noted his extraordinary military career and his lifelong defense of his father. He had married Ilse Marie Freifrau von Münchhausen in 1960, and she had died in 2010. He spent his final years near Velbert-Langenberg, not far from the family plot where his parents' gravestone had been moved from Wiesbaden. To the end, he remained convinced that his father had been wrongly condemned, that the Nuremberg trials had been victor's justice, that history would eventually vindicate Joachim von Ribbentrop. History has not obliged. The 4 other Ribbentrop children lived far more quietly than their eldest brother. Bettina, born in 1922, was 24 when her father was executed. She later married and took the surname Rinke, distancing herself from the Ribbentrop name while maintaining family connections. Ursula, born in 1932, was only 13 when the war ended and 14 when her father was hanged. She would later marry twice, first to Kurt Kupers and then to Pierre-Marie Pinvin, a Frenchman. Her life after the war remains largely private, a deliberate retreat from the public scrutiny that pursued her family. Adolf Richard Barthold von Ribbentrop, born in September 1935, carried his stepfather's name Adolf, a choice that reflected the family's deep commitment to the Nazi leadership. He was only 11 when his father died. Pastor Martin Niemöller, the famous anti-Nazi theologian who would later be imprisoned in Sachsenhausen concentration camp, had refused to baptize him because of the name. The youngest, Barthold Joachim Lothar Stefan Karl von Ribbentrop, was born in December 1940. He was only 5 years old when the war ended and 6 when his father was executed. He lived until 2018, dying at 77 after a life spent largely out of public view. None of the younger Ribbentrop children became public defenders of their father's legacy in the way Rudolph did. None wrote memoirs or gave extensive interviews. They married, had children of their own, and built lives in a Germany that was slowly confronting its past. Their silence itself became a kind of statement, a recognition perhaps that some legacies are best left undefended. Unlike the Himmler family, where Gudrun Berwitz spent decades actively supporting former SS members through organizations like Stille Hilfe, or the Göring family, where Edda defended her father until her death in 2018, the younger Ribbentrops chose obscurity. Whether this represented shame, exhaustion, or simply a desire for normalcy, they never publicly explained. The Ribbentrop name carried particular weight because of Joachim's role not just in the Nazi regime, but in the very outbreak of the Second World War. It was Ribbentrop who negotiated the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in August 1939, the non-aggression agreement between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union that secretly divided Eastern Europe between the two powers and cleared the way for Hitler's invasion of Poland. It was Ribbentrop who had assured Hitler that Britain and France would not fight for Poland. It was Ribbentrop who had signed the Pact of Steel with Italy and the Tripartite Pact with Japan and Italy. His signature appeared on the documents that launched a war that killed tens of millions. For his children, this was an inheritance that could never be renounced, only endured. In the decades after the war, the question of what the children of Nazi leaders owed to history became a subject of intense debate. Some descendants, like Catherine Himmler, great-niece of Heinrich Himmler, chose to confront their family histories head-on, writing books and speaking publicly about the need to understand how ordinary families produced architects of genocide. Others, like Bettina Göring, Hermann Göring's grandniece, took the most extreme step possible. She and her brother voluntarily underwent sterilization to end the line and ensure no future generation would inherit what she called the shadow of Göring. The Ribbentrop children took neither path. They did not become public voices for reconciliation or remembrance, nor did they make dramatic gestures of renunciation. They simply lived their lives, carrying a name that opened doors for some and closed them for others, that brought connections to former Nazi circles, but also brought suspicion from those who remembered what their father had done. The legal and financial aftermath of Joachim von Ribbentrop's execution continued for years. Unlike some Nazi leaders whose families were left destitute, the Ribbentrops retained substantial resources thanks to Annelies's Henkel inheritance and her successful navigation of the denazification process. This wealth enabled the children to receive educations, establish careers, and live comfortably, even as they carried names that many Germans associated with catastrophe. Rudolph's forced employment at Henkel was only one of many legal battles Annelies fought to protect and expand her children's interests. She was, by all accounts, as formidable a mother as she had been a political wife, using every resource at her disposal to ensure her children's futures were secured, despite their father's disgrace. When Annelies died in 1973, she was buried in the Henkel family grave in Wiesbaden-Biebrich, her husband's name added to the gravestone, even though his remains had been cremated and scattered at an undisclosed location to prevent his grave from becoming a shrine. Decades later, in 2015, the gravestone was moved from Wiesbaden to the communal cemetery of Velbert-Langenberg, closer to where Rudolph and his wife Ilse were buried. The relocation was reported by historians tracking the final resting places of Nazi families, another small footnote in the long aftermath of the Third Reich. Even in death, the family remained subjects of historical interest, their graves mapped and documented by researchers who sought to understand how Germany had dealt and failed to deal with its perpetrators and their descendants. The Ribbentrop family story mirrors a particular strand of post-war German experience. The strand of privilege maintained, of legacies defended, of wealth preserved despite the crimes committed to accumulate it. Unlike some Nazi families who were reduced to poverty and obscurity, the Ribbentrops retained enough resources and enough defiance to shape their own narrative. Annelies' books, Rudolph's memoir, the legal victories that forced their way back into the Henkel business, all represented a refusal to accept the verdict that history had rendered. They were not alone in this. Across post-war Germany, families of Nazi leaders employed similar strategies, using whatever resources remained to construct alternative histories in which their fathers and husbands had been misunderstood, had been following orders, had been victims of Allied propaganda. The Ribbentrops were simply more successful than most, yet even success could not erase the fundamental facts. Joachim von Ribbentrop had signed the treaties that launched a war of annihilation. He had pressured neutral and satellite states to surrender their Jews. He had served a regime that murdered 6 million Jews and millions of others. No memoir, no legal victory, no preservation of family wealth could change this. His children inherited not just money and connections, but a moral burden that no amount of silence or defense could lift. When Rudolph died in 2019, the newspapers noted that he had never apologized for his father, never acknowledged the crimes committed in his father's name. The same could be said of all the Ribbentrop children. They defended or they stayed silent. None chose to speak the words that some children of perpetrators eventually spoke, that their fathers had been wrong, that the regime they served had been evil, that the victims deserved acknowledgement and memory. The Ribbentrop family's story also illuminates the limits of denazification. Annelies escaped formal classification despite her deep involvement in Nazi society. Rudolph served in one of the most notorious units of the Waffen-SS, yet faced no prosecution for war crimes. The family retained wealth derived from their privileged position under the Nazis. This was not unusual. Across Germany, denazification tribunals varied wildly in their rigor, and many families with deep Nazi connections emerged with their positions largely intact. The need to rebuild Germany, the onset of the Cold War, the simple exhaustion of a society that had endured total war, all contributed to a process that was thorough in principle, but inconsistent in practice. The Ribbentrops benefited from these inconsistencies. They were not the only ones. Today, the Ribbentrop descendants have largely faded from public view. Rudolph's children and grandchildren, like those of his siblings, live private lives. The name still carries its historical weight, still appears in history books and documentaries about the Nazi era, still evokes the image of a vain diplomat who helped plunge the world into war. But the living Ribbentrops have, for the most part, chosen not to engage with this legacy publicly. Whether they discuss it privately, whether they wrestle with questions of guilt and inheritance and responsibility, remains unknown. They have chosen the privacy that public figures' descendants often seek, the anonymity that allows ordinary life to proceed despite extraordinary ancestry. The von Ribbentrop family's journey from the heights of Nazi power to the complexities of post-war survival offers a window into how the Third Reich's legacy extended far beyond 1945. Annelies remained a true believer until her death. Rudolph defended his father for nearly 75 years. The younger children retreated into silence. Together, they represented the range of responses available to those who inherited names associated with atrocity, defense, and disappearance. None chose the path of public reckoning that some Nazi descendants eventually walked. None became voices for remembrance or reconciliation. They remained, to the end, the family of Hitler's foreign minister, carrying a weight that history assigned them and that they chose to bear in their own ways. If you found this video insightful, watch what happened to Hermann Göring's family after WW2 next. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more historic weirdos. Thanks for watching.